Okay, the next flow control statement we're going to talk about is what UnrealScript calls case statements. They're also known as switch statements in C++. So the case statement is a really good handler for when you have a variable that could be a certain kind of defined range of values. This is very much a use case for the enumeration types that we went over earlier, to where you have an enumerated set of values. Each value represents something different about that variable or how it would be processed. The switch or case statement allows you to very clearly kind of define what processing will happen based off of what value that variable currently has. And it's a little bit cleaner in the case, especially of using an enumeration, than using a set of if and else if statements. We went over that here. And this can be very useful for kind of comparing against arbitrary values or however you need to do that. But when you know exactly what you want to happen for a very specific value, then the case statement is a really good candidate for that. So let's go ahead and show you how to set one of those up. The first keyword you're going to use is the keyword switch. And then in parentheses, just like you were doing an if statement, you're going to define what variable that you want to do the case statement on. So if we go back up here to where we had defined our enumerated type of a game developer, and we declared a new developer, and we assigned it to the value of game designer, which is also the value of 1. So if we go ahead and kind of use this example here in our case statement, then what we're going to do here is put new developer here, which is our variable, and we're going to go ahead and do the curly braces. And inside the curly braces here, what you're going to do is you're going to define what set of processing you want to do for each potential value. And then you can always catch have a default case, which will just catch anything that you didn't specifically have a check for or a particular handling for. So the keyword here is case, which is where the case statement comes from. So here you're going to put in the value that you want to compare, or that you want to check to see if new developer is that value. So this could be, the value of 1, or 0, 2, whatever. But because we have that enumerated type, we can also go ahead and check against that. So we can say, is this new developer currently the value of an artist based on the enumerated type? And use a colon here to define the end of the case statement. And then here you're going to have any processing that you would want to do based off of the value being artist. So we'll just say do. Okay, and then we're going to put in the keyword break, and we'll explain why in just a second. So we'll go ahead and drop down to a new line here, and we'll make the second case, and this is if it was a designer. Add the colon, drop down, and then we're going to go ahead and break here as well. Okay, and then finally we're going to do the final case based on our enumeration. And I just remembered that we actually defined the fourth discipline type for a game developer, or for the common, and that was an audio designer, but we'll just call it audio. Okay. And then the very last thing we're going to do is go ahead and put in the keyword default with the colon, and we're going to and then we still want to break here, although this is not technically required because it's the last thing in the switch statement or case statement. So once it finished the processing here, it would exit out of the case statement just because there were no additional lines to process. So let's go ahead and back up to the top here and go over what each of these keywords is defining. So again, the case is basically the value that you are wanting to check to see whether the variable that was passed in is going to be currently set to. So we've got the value of new developer, which we know based on what we set it on up higher in the file is currently set to the value of designer, which is also the value of 1. So what this is saying is it would come in, it would evaluate, is the current variable set to artist? No, it's not. So it would pass over any functionality or any script that is in between these case statements. And so when it gets to the second case statement, it's going to test true for this, kind of like these are sort of like if statements, but like I said, it's a little bit easier and cleaner than stringing together a long chain of if and else if. This is a lot cleaner and a little bit more readable, just to kind of see the very specific values you're checking against. The if statements work well when you're checking against, sort of a range of saying like if this is between this number and some other number. But when you really just want to test on a specific value, this is kind of the cleaner way to do it. So currently, with the value being set to designer, it would go ahead and come in here and execute whatever script was between the case statement line and then the break statement. Now what the break statement is doing is it's going to cause it, in this case it skipped over all of this because it was not equal to artist. It would test true here, and so it comes in to do this. If you do not have the break statement, which is right here, then what it'll do is it'll actually begin to fall through the remaining case statements and continue processing them. It's already found a case that was true, and so essentially it's just going to start going through and executing all the remaining script lines unless you put a break in to stop it. So if whatever script we were going to be writing in here needed to be very specific and only done if it was an artist or designer or programmer or an audio guy, then you would want to make sure that you had a break statement inside of each case to make sure that it didn't fall through and apply any of the script processing that you had only kind of wanted to reserve for that particular discipline or a person in that discipline. Now, the one interesting thing about this is you can intentionally leave this out in certain cases to where maybe you actually do want two of the cases to do the same processing. If that's true, then what you can do is you could essentially just remove this, and you could still do some processing here if you wanted to. So let's leave that in there. Something specific. But by omitting the break statement here, if we come in, a new developer set to artist, it's going to do the scripting, or however many lines of scripting there are between the case statements, and then it's going to fall through and also do the processing inside of the designer case. Then it's going to hit this break statement, which is going to cause the execution to skip basically to the end of the curly braces and start moving down from there. So if the case where these two disciplines say whatever code you were assigning as far as setting up their profile or their seating assignments, whatever the case would be, then if say artists and designers have very similar kind of setups, then you don't really need to do anything specific, although you do have the option to say if it is an artist, do something specific. You could omit all of the scripting from this case and just basically stack two cases on top of each other. And you're saying if basically you're creating a case where you were doing an or in an if statement. So you're saying this or this, do something. And so you're saying if it's an artist or a designer, do that. But you still have this nice readable format, and then you could still do the special case processing if you wanted to for another discipline. So the default keyword down here, you always want to put this in at the end just to make sure that something gets handled. Even if whatever you're doing here is just logging a message saying, no processing was done, or maybe that is considered an invalid value for the property, like you are always expecting the value of the property that's passed in to have a matching case, then the default would be where you could log an error. So, but you can also have, if there's default processing that you always want to happen to everybody, that's where it gets a little tricky because you can only have it fall through until the next break. So unless you were to omit all of the break statements here and only have one for the default case, then technically, yes, it would fall through and always hit the default processing, but whichever one it triggered first would technically give it more processing. So if the value was audio, because it would skip these case statements and hit this one, then it would fall through default, but you would have missed whatever else you might have had up here for the other disciplines. So case statements are not great for when you basically want to, in that case where you wanted to do almost all the processing inside of default, you would really not want to put that scripting inside of the actual switch case. You would want to just handle the very specific things to these values, and then you'd want to have some additional scripting outside of the switch statement that went on to operate on the new developer variable, but handled that kind of uniform scripting or processing that you want to do on that variable, independent of what the value was. So again, we'll just kind of review this really quickly. You've got the switch keyword is how you started off. In parentheses, you're going to put the variable that you want to check each individual case line against. The case keyword is followed by the value that you want to check to see if this variable is. So this could just be a numerical value. In this case, we're using the enumerated list of values, which is what the new developer we know is based on. You remember that if you do not have the break keyword, it will fall through to the next case statement and do whatever processing and continue to do that until it does hit a break keyword. So you generally would always have a break inside of each case if you only want to do very specific things to the variable based on its current value. In this case, we'll leave it as an example that you can stack them like this and have them fall through. And then you have your default keyword, which is where you will just handle whatever would, if anything needs to happen, if the value that was passed in is not equal to any of the specific cases that you had called out. So another reason that it's good to put the default in is if you're thinking about your scripting, your programming in the sense of scalability, is if that enumeration ever changed as far as the number of entries in it, say they added, an additional value to that list, then this case or the switch statement or case statement now has, unless somebody comes and updates it, a missing case for a value that is now valid for the new developer or the game developer variable type. So that's where default is good to have something in here, whether it's just a log or something that catches an error and just handles some sort of script case where you need to at least at the very least you need to tell whoever has made the updates that, hey, there's something wrong with this, or you need to come update this code too because the value of new developer changed. I mean, you could be that explicit with it of just having a log error that says if this log statement has been fired, then the game developer enumeration has been updated and the matching switch case or case statement has not been updated to reflect that. And that way you've got a really easy way to trace back and figure out what needs to actually be fixed. Okay, so that's the case statement, or switch statement as it's commonly referred to. And just realize that I've had this as state and not switch. So there we go. Case or switch statement is how it's commonly referred to. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is more flow control statements, and this is going to be the one that you're going to be using a lot, just like the if statements, and that's going to be for loops and occasionally while loops. So we're just going to kind of categorize this as loops in general and talk about how to set those up.